Thank you again for joining us today. So far, if you're just joining at this point, you missed a panel on um, low-cost, quick ways to improve your elections for 2024. And that information will be made available so you can go back and watch that if you need to. And then we just had a panel with sort of a fireside chat, kind of the electronic version of a fireside chat, where Tova Wang and Scott Pioli discussed using arenas and stadiums as possible polling places. And now we'll finish up with one last panel. And this one is a kind of an interesting one in that we have a lot of local election officials on the call. And this one is sort of positioned at the state level in many respects, but it's state down to local. So we're hopeful that the kinds of things we'll talk about here can provide some financial assistance and program assistance to local elections officials as well as states through the various grant and other opportunities that we have. So let's go ahead and get started. So first up, we're going to talk to Cait Conley. As you can see from the screen, she is the Senior Advisor to the Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, so CISA, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. And why don't I go ahead and hand it to her, and she can get started with the presentation.
Thanks, Judd. And after looking at that slide, I certainly get the award for, I think, longest title out there. So great to be here with you all. And first, really just want to say on behalf of the agency, on behalf of our director, Jen Easterly, a huge thank you to all of you who are truly on the front lines of defending our democratic process. We are so proud to play a role in just trying to help you all fulfill this really sacred and important duty to the American people. And so thank you for what you do, and thank you for all of the work that goes into that's year round. So as Judd said, I represent CISA. In terms of what CISA is, for those who may not be totally familiar, so we are the federal government lead in helping the election infrastructure sector help secure election infrastructure against the range of physical, cyber, and operational risks that look to undermine its security or resiliency. And so what that really means is we have teams of folks back at our headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, but most importantly, all across the country. So in all 50 states, DC, and our territories, we have hundreds of folks who are our cybersecurity advisors, our physical security advisors, and most recently, election security advisors who are out there on the front lines, really meeting you all where you're at in terms of helping provide free services, information, and tools to help you all understand how these risks may present to your unique jurisdictional needs. So some of the services that our teams offer include things like cyber or physical security assessments, where they'll go and they'll help identify, here are areas that are currently gaps that you could close, and here are some potential ways to close that gap, right? Like here are some potential solutions in either the physical or cyber domain to help just make your office, your staff, your voters, your overall process even more secure. And so with that, though, we recognize that just saying, hey, here's things you can do without helping you do them is not really maximizing our value to you. So there are some services that CISA offers for free. We do offer free cybersecurity services like vulnerability scanning and web application scanning, where we basically are able to tell you if there's any known exploitable vulnerabilities so you can close them before a nefarious actor does. We do that for networks everywhere and is basically a way to help you just, again, better understand what your internet-facing vulnerabilities are of your network, so you can do something about it before a malicious actor does, because I promise you they're also doing those scans. So that's an example of some of the free services we offer to, again, help you actually close that gap between knowledge and action and actually reduce risk. But we also acknowledge there are certain things that we don't offer as a service that does require resourcing. At the end of the day, it's going to take money. whether it's on the physical or cyber side. And so one of the ways as the Department of Homeland Security, which we are a part of, we're trying to help tackle that is through some of our federal grant programs. And one of, I think, the most important and impactful ways we've been able to evolve that is the types of grant programs that can apply to election security. So what I'd say is from the Department of Homeland Security standpoint, there's really three types of grants that we provide that can help you. There's the Homeland Security Grant Program, which I'm going to come back to in more detail. There's the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. And then there's the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. So I'll start from the reverse because I want to spend more time on the Homeland Security Grant Program and really the value there, and especially the election security requirement that we've integrated into it. But in terms of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, this was really intended to help harden the physical security of nonprofit organizations that are at a high risk. And so ways that this could be useful for you all is, I know the previous panel was talking about other locations that are utilized to support the elections process, right? Like other locations that you use to serve as a polling place or vote center. So this is a good example of how if a nonprofit organization is one of those types of entities that you engage with to be used also as a voting center or polling center, encouraging them to try to apply for it and to utilize funds from the Department of Homeland Security to help secure their location overall could also benefit the election security mission. So again, and these are all available, and I can drop a link in later, but the Nonprofit Security Grant Program from the Department of Homeland Security is something that some members of your community could tap into to, again, help harden their physical security. The second program that I want to talk about is the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. This is newer. This was introduced because we do know that advancing cybersecurity is very much dependent upon having not just the right knowledge of what you need to do, but the right resources. And so recognizing that network security, in this case, election security, is national security. How do we help address some of that? So this program provides funding to state and local governments and territories to address cybersecurity risks and threats to state and local and territorial information systems. It allows for targeted cybersecurity investments. It's a 3-year pay of performance plan. And that, again, is really to just help enhance your security maturity for your overall office and that of your jurisdiction. So cyber and that plan is really targeted for that specific type of threat stream. The third one that I want to get into, and I think is really, a great resource, especially for this community, is the Department of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Grant Program, HSGP. So this thing was initiated about 20 years ago, right after 9/11, and it was really focused on helping state and local governments improve their security based on terrorism-related threats. And so what you've seen this program do over 20 years is a lot of law enforcement entities are leveraging this for enhancing security capabilities. We've seen this enhance other security of government buildings. While this funding stream can be used for cyber or physical, I really think the application for the physical security needs of election offices and government facilities is a very compelling and huge win with this grant program itself, and is very easy to translate into the grant requirements. And so the Homeland Security Grant Program has technically three, but I'll focus on two subordinate grant programs that you might be a little bit more familiar with. One is called the State Homeland Security Grant Program. So if you've heard of SHSP, and then the Urban Area Security Initiative, UASI. So State Homeland Security Grant Program and UASI are all subcomponents of the Homeland Security Grant Program. HSGP, this overall bucket, we as the Department of Homeland Security mandated a 3% minimum spend requirement for every state. So we basically said, if you, a state, are going to apply for any of these funds, there is a requirement that at a minimum, 3% of those requested grant funds for HSGP must be allocated towards election security. And you must do that in consultation with your state chief election official. I will tell you, this is a newer requirement. This is only the second year that it's been in place. And so with that, there's still some process and awareness that we're really trying to help increase. But within your state, there's something called the state administering agency. And that's the state government representative that's responsible for submitting all these applications. And every state has their own process for how those applications are submitted. If there's county committees or if it's a state-run process. So that varies. But getting into that process and providing them with tangible requirements to submit is something that we deliberately were intending with the Homeland Security Grant Program. And again, when people say, well, it's not that much money, 3% for election security was the minimum spend requirement, minimum. So it can be more than that. But this is something that we're hoping becomes a routine expectation in that grant program, so that way we can forecast this into coming years. But examples of things you can use that for, right? So I talked to you earlier about CISA provides in-person office assessments, whether it's cyber or physical. Well, if you have recommendations from those assessments that are currently unfunded, those are perfect examples of things to submit for our grant programs to help get the department to provide funding for you to implement those recommendations. And so this is where we try to get it to come full circle, right? We're going to provide assessments, then provide federal grant opportunities that can help you implement those assessments and really close that loop in terms of risk identification and risk management. So in terms of CISA and the Department of Homeland Security, I know we don't have a lot of time and I could easily spend 30 minutes just deep diving these programs, but here's the big things to please remember. There's really 3 big bins of grant programs to explore. You have the nonprofit one that could be useful for potential polling locations or vote centers for your community partners that are nonprofits. You have the state and local cybersecurity grant program, again, to help state and local governments and territorial governments increase their overall information network security. And then the third, and this is really where I think your offices in particular can benefit working into this system, is the Homeland Security Grant Program, either on the state Homeland Security Grant Program side or the Urban Area Security Initiative side, with providing recommendations or requirements rather to meet that 3% minimum spend requirement. And so these are just, again, mechanisms to access federal funding to help address some of the gaps that you may have. In addition to that, please do come and contact your CISA field service representative for some of the free services that we just offer every day, whether it's in-person assessments, whether it's some of our cybersecurity services, all of those things. Please use us. We're here to help with trainings, in person or virtual, to include tabletop exercises. Really, there's a suite of things that we would love to help bring to you all at the county and state level. So I'd ask you to check out our Protect 2024 website. On that, it has the full list of things that we can bring to bear for you. So thank you, Judd, and thank you for the time with this crew today. It is a privilege to be with you all. Please let us know how we can help, and thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Cait. That was fantastic. You really gave us a lot of information there. I really appreciate it. And I would just note for those of you that are on the call, maybe local election officials, some of the elections specialists at the local regions are even on this presentation. So they've literally joined us. So they are very linked into the work that we do, the kinds of events that we participate in like this. So, and in many respects are very recently past election officials. So they really understand and know the work that you do and the challenges that you face. Thank you, Cait. We will come back to questions for you. Thank you. Ben Hovland, you are next in the queue. Really appreciate you being here. The EAC got a nice plug in the first panel. when Tommy Gong talked to us about winning one of the awards through the EAC for the wonderful work that they were doing. And I'd love to hear what other kinds of funding opportunities and services the EAC can provide here in these last kind of 5.5 months to the November election.
Thanks, Judd. It's great to be here. I have mitigated my own risk in honor of Cait and our federal partners at CISA by not operating the slides myself. So I will not have, hopefully, technical issues on my end, but appreciate the help from the Humphrey School. So next slide, please. Hopefully, you all are familiar with the Election Assistance Commission. If not, just a quick overview here. We are a small federal agency with a mission to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the process. Next slide. And so again, we were created by the Help America Vote Act now 22 years ago. And with that, we have 4 primary missions in my mind. 1, testing and certifying voting equipment. 2, one of the thing that we're here to talk about today, which is distributing grants. We also do the EVE survey, the Election Administration and Voting Survey, which is the only national survey of its kind that looks at how Americans are participating in the process, how they're getting registered, how they're voting. Appreciate the folks on this webinar who fill that out. Thank you. And then finally, the broadest bucket is serving as a national clearinghouse for best practices in election administration. This is an area that has been expanding in recent years, and I'll talk about a little bit toward the end. But first and foremost, we're here to talk about grants. Next slide. And I think that's a critical conversation. Right now, when I look across the elections landscape, elections are harder than they've ever been to run, and they're more expensive. And so having real conversations about what the funding of elections looks like at the state, federal, and local level, I think is critical. We love being able to distribute HAVA grants, but again, they're just a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall funding of elections. So if you're familiar with historic HAVA funding, I've skipped a lot of it here. With original HAVA, you had over $3 billion. Most of that got distributed and essentially came to an end around 2010. And so there were several years where we didn't see federal funding. That restarted again in 2018. So those we broadly call the HAVA security grants. And so you can see here from 2018 forward, there's been just over $1 billion in HAVA security grants. A couple things that I think are important to think about on these is their flexibility, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But also, these go to every state and territory in the country. They largely, there's a minimum that gets tied for each distribution, and then it follows a population formula. As you can see, we saw more in 2018 and 2020, and then we with $380 million and $425 million respectively. And then 22 and 23 were $75 million each fiscal year. And then the most recent congressional appropriation came in with $55 million. Those funds don't expire once we've distributed them to the states. So where different states are varies across the country on those spend levels. Next slide, please. One of the things I was mentioning was that this is very flexible money, and we really think that that is important. I think the 2 biggest things to me about the importance of HAVA security grants are, one, that they're dedicated election funding. I welcome any funding for elections, but so often we see that if at every level of government, when elections has to compete with other priorities, often elections gets left out. And so the great thing on the election security grants is or the HAVA grants is they're only for elections, and primarily, the main point is that they're for improving federal elections. And so we have seen this money be used to replace paperless equipment, to improve or replace or upgrade statewide voter registration databases. We see it used in trainings, tabletop exercises, etc. Really an array of different uses, because we know each state is in a different place. We've also seen it used around physical security, and recently the commission voted unanimously to explicitly state that it could be used to combat AI-generated disinformation. Again, this is very flexible money, and really, to me, the bigger challenge is there enough for all of those, for the needs in all of those areas? Next slide, please. So here you can just get a little bit of a sense of how states have used this money. From what I was talking about earlier, again, far and away, the biggest category we've seen this money spent on is cyber and physical security, followed by replacing voting equipment. Again, a lot of paperless equipment got replaced, particularly after the first sort of tranche of this funding in 2018. Again, mentioned voter registration systems. This is another big area where we've seen states either replace their statewide voter registration database or harden that with things like with multi-factor authentication, et cetera. And so, to me, again, this funding's been very critical. I think it's important to tell the story of it. I'll flag here, you can see about 50% has been used. I will say this is from reporting as of September of 23. We just got recent reports in, but have not combed through that data yet to fully update this. So a little bit more of this will be spent, and we'll update these accordingly in the next few weeks. But just wanted to give you a sense of how this money has been spent. And then if you want to go to the next slide, I also wanted to talk about, we talk about grants a lot, but when I think about what are the resources that are out there, the resources that the EAC or federal government or other partners can provide, certainly grants and dollars are a huge part of it, but there are other resources as well that can save jurisdictions money. So this area of the clearinghouse that I mentioned at the EAC has really been an area we've been able to expand in recent years. We've seen some funding increases at the EAC, and a lot of that has gone into expanding the clearinghouse function. As we know from the wheel graphic here, there are so many responsibilities for election administrators. And so we've been working through that, looking at different ways to create resources that will hopefully save election administrators time and or money. Next slide, please. One of those that we've seen a lot of uptake on, National Poll Worker Recruitment Day. This is something that we started in 2020. This year, it's on August 1st. But along with that day of action, we've also created toolkits, customizable graphics, and we've seen jurisdictions in states from over 41 states participate in this. When you take out the states that don't have poll workers, it's a pretty good uptake. And we also saw a territory participate with Help America Vote Day in January. So encourage you to check out helpamericavote.gov there for some resources and toolkit information around participating for this year's National Poll Worker Recruitment Day. Next slide. Similarly, this just came out last week. We just recently released this election official social media toolkit. Again, recognize that a lot of offices don't have a graphic designer, maybe don't have dedicated social media staff. Usually that's maybe you as the election official. A great presentation earlier for Michael Segrist about doing voter outreach and reaching out and doing voter education. So this toolkit, again, goes through and has customizable graphics and sample text that can be tweaked, again, to talk about, your voter registration deadline in your state, put in your link. It's got the alt text to make it accessible. Again, this is on our website, and a great way, hopefully, to save time and do more with voter education. I think this area is something that is going to be more and more critical. Obviously, we've seen the mis and disinformation of the last few cycles, but as people talk about generative AI and what the future looks like, I mentioned earlier that elections are harder to administer and more expensive than they've ever been. I also will say that to me, I know that so often voter education it has become or is a back burner issue, is maybe not invested in or focused on as much. Certainly when you have statutory requirements and other priorities, it's hard to do that. I think the information environment that we're in is forcing us to be in a place where it's no longer optional. And so this is another area to potentially take advantage of resources from partners. Next slide, please. And speaking of partners and resources, another thing that the DAC has created is the clearinghouse community. This is a national network for election officials where people can share resources, can share templates, can ask questions of their colleagues around the country. Certainly, this is a virtual conference, but so often the benefits of attending these in person is the ability to have that conversation over the break, while you're getting coffee. We created the clearinghouse community to allow that to happen year round. Again, have seen great examples of it. One that I flag occasionally, somebody put in there, hey, does anybody have any good voter education material on encouraging people to fill out the bubble properly on the ballot? And sure enough, Steve Deitch, who is one of our subject matter experts, and you see his contact information there, threw up, oh, hey, in the Clearinghouse Awards or the Clearys last year, there was a jurisdiction that was recognized and won for that, and connected this jurisdiction to those resources, and they were able to tailor it to their needs. So a great community and conversation and opportunity here. Next slide, please. Finally, I know I've hit a lot here. If you haven't been to the EAC website in a while, we've got a lot of things going on that we're very proud of. And so we created this newsletter because every month there are new resources coming out. And this is sort of a one-stop for you. It's a monthly newsletter that will keep track of our new resources, hearings that we do, other things that we flag that are relevant to election officials. So encourage you to sign up for that as well, to be kept up to date on what resources we see and are coming out. Next slide. And again, here's our general contact information where you can find us on social, and certainly welcome any feedback from any of you. Next slide. And you can always reach out to me. So thank you, Judd, and thanks to the folks from the Humphrey School for including us today.
It's great. Thank you very much, Ben. A lot of great information there. And I think one of the things that I take away from that is if you're a local elections administrator and you would like some of that federal money that's been directed to your state, tell your state, because the state very likely has some money that they received or are receiving now through that additional HAVA money. And the state, I work for the state, so I'm sympathetic to this, but the state takes that money and we think of ways to use it, and we kind of go like this. Okay, great. Now we can do that thing that we wanted to do. But we really should be prioritizing our local communities, and if we can redirect that money, we'd like to. So, let your state know that you need that money. All right, Ben, thank you so much. Let's move to Sam Oliker-Friedland, who is going to talk to us about sort of the private world of elections funding. And is there money? I don't know. We can hear from Sam. Also, what kind of limitations are there in the access of that money? So Sam, take it away.
Hey folks, thank you for allowing me to join you today. I'm Sam Oliker-Friedland. I lead the Institute for Responsive Government. I'm only correcting my title in the front slide here that we are not the Institute for Responsive Federal Government. And I'm correcting that only because I think the entire point of my presentation today is going to be that you all, the local election officials on this call, are doing the hardest, most important work to make our democracy run. And when we look for sort of responsive, smart, practical innovation going on in government, we often look to you all and your local colleagues across the country as sort of in many ways, the folks who sort of drive change that bubbles up nationally. And that's really the story of sort of what I want to talk to today. And I don't have a slideshow just so we can sort of like talk through this, but I'm really excited to see what questions you all have. And to Judd's point, we're not going to have any sort of major announcements today about availability of private support for election administrators in 2024, but I wanted to sort of tell you the story of what has happened since 2020, some of the sort of changes that have happened since 2020 in the places where election officials and philanthropy and money interact, and then talk a little bit more about how actually sort of the story of private money in election administration has become the story of how we get enough public money into election administration. And just want to sort of like double underline at the end of this presentation things that Ben and Cait were saying about ways that government of all levels can step up more to sort of provide you all what you need. One final note, so I do not work at the Center for Tech and Civic Life. We partner closely with CTCL, and the entire CTCL team is actually in a staff retreat today. So that's the reason that you're stuck with me to give this presentation. But sort of we're a partner that does a lot of the legal and policy work related to CTCL's work to help local election officials. So we are admirers of many of you behind the scenes. At the same time that I think you've probably worked more directly with CTCL. So for those of you who don't know on this call, we worked with CTCL on a COVID response grant program in 2020 that ended up giving out a little above $400 million total of philanthropic money directly to local election administrators to support your work in probably the most challenging election, hopefully, of all of our lifetimes. That went to over 2,500 cities and counties across the country. Every election official sort of got what they applied for and were able to apply that to infrastructure needs like poll workers, new equipment, COVID safety measures, et cetera. The median jurisdiction size that received that money in 2020 was under 25,000 voters. So this was a sort of predominance actually of small jurisdictions across the country that most badly needed funds and were most able to sort of nimbly deploy those funds for things that they needed in 2020, and can sort of answer any questions that folks have about the 2020 program. But the sort of headline is this was designed with local election officials in mind to plug in a sort of emergency infrastructure need. What I'm going to talk about now is ways since 2020 that we have worked to try to make this less of an emergency, so to speak, and then sort of flag what we see as the emergency still lingering in 2024. So broadly speaking, I think that one of the most lasting aspects of the pandemic was an expectation that election officials across the country run sort of multiple elections at once, be that high vote by mail volume paired with high early voting volume paired with high in-person volumes, and driving sort of costs up as those vote modalities ended up being sort of even in various jurisdictions. And while election officials may not be paying as much for hand sanitizer or masks or typical health safety things this year as they were in previous years, election administrators across the country are still paying for that pandemic level of sort of different kinds of elections running at the same time. And that's paired with ongoing public underinvestment in election administration at sort of every level of government. And so that's the sort of like story that is sort of a through line since 2020, hardworking local officials being given what I would actually call an unfunded mandate by Congress and their state legislatures for the most part, who you are sort of the local election officials on the call. You are running elections for state legislature, governor, Senate, Congress, president, and not being sort of given enough resources by those bodies to make those elections happen. And I think overall, the story we are telling is that that needs to change. We estimate the national election infrastructure needs as being about $20 billion over 10 years. You can go to modernizeourelections.org if you want to see some of the white papers that dig into details on that calculation. But the numbers that you saw from Ben, and it's unbelievably great that the EAC has done that money so far, and I think Ben would agree with me on this, the numbers we are sort of seeing have not been enough. We've also seen a new set of restrictions on private support for election administration across the country since 2020. This is a sort of relatively new set of restrictions that swept through states rather quickly. About 28 states now have some restriction on the ability of private actors to support local election administrators. That still leaves 22 states with the same similar lack of restrictions that they have had pre-2020. In those 28 states, it's basically an incredibly complicated legal analysis to figure out what is still acceptable, generally speaking, and these are generalities. There are sort of no large, these are different statutes in different states. There's no really big conclusions we can draw across the country, but generally speaking, they ban monetary support. And so it makes it harder for nonprofits to support underfunded local election departments with money, while providing varying levels of restriction on technical support or in-kind support or the ability of experts from across the country to help sort of provide what we need. That set of restrictions, I think, is paired really importantly with a growth in organizations that do direct support for local election officials. And I think this is another important trend since 2020 that I think is worth highlighting. Organizations like the Elections Group that many of you have worked with, or Center for Civic Design, or United States Digital Response to have more staff, more money, and more capacity to support election officials with procedures and design and technology than existed in 2020 or before 2020. I think that's a really sort of positive development that pairs with some of the restrictions that I see as a negative development. And I sort of want to flag why I call these restrictions a negative development. I think it's a sort of reaction that makes it harder to get you all what you need. But secondly, of the 28 states that restricted private money for election administration, only one, if I have any Pennsylvanians in the room, only one, that was Pennsylvania, paired their restriction on private money with enough public money to make a difference in local election officials' abilities to do work. So that Pennsylvania restriction was paired with an annual $45 million state level appropriation for election administration, including election administration at the county level in Pennsylvania. Otherwise, those restrictions have come in without that public money paired. And I think that, to me, is sort of the most frustrating part of this. The last trend before I get to sort of public money and what we're doing to sort of catalyze public money is that we have seen longer term capacity building through private support for local election officials. So want to particularly flag the work of the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence. I see Tommy here. I think I saw Fred from Greenwich in the participants list. We have some great bipartisan election officials across the country who are participating in longer term work to strengthen their departments, sort of create gold standard election departments. And that has come with funding sort of for those long-term infrastructure building needs. I'm dropping in the chat a video that the U.S. Alliance put together about grant money and what it was able to accomplish in a small county in southwestern Illinois called Macoupin. They were able to make a real estate change that they had needed to make for years using Alliance funding. And that's a great example of how this money is, I think, particularly transformative for small rural election administrators and sort of their ability to do more with less, which is, by the way, I think one of the most sort of underrated heroic acts that election administrators do every day, is the ability to take sort of sustained underfunding over time and really run some gold standard elections in that environment of underfunding. But the last thing I will say is I think we need to work together moving forward to make sure that that underfunding isn't significant. So our plan for sort of catalyzing any sort of private support for local election officials this year is working hand in hand with a strategy that requires election officials to be speaking up about the need for those public funds. So there were about 38,000 appropriation requests that went into Congress over the last few months from local election officials in support of more federal money for election administration. We at Responsive Gov have worked closely with state legislatures and have catalyzed about 400 million over the last 4 years in new state legislative funding. As many of you know better than I do, you are generally funded through local property tax revenues. And just like Congress needs to step in with higher levels of election funding, state legislatures need to step in with higher levels of election funding to meet that $20 billion over 10 years infrastructure need that election officials have. And I'm happy to sort of take any questions on that, but the one thing I sort of want to make sure to leave folks with is that everything sort of we do to provide nonprofit support is part of this strategy to get public funding in the door. And we're going to need help from election officials from all parties, urban, rural, big, small, east, west, to sort of make that happen. So thanks. Great to meet you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it. So we have time for a couple of questions. We've got some that have been put in the Q&A function on the Zoom, so I'll follow up with a couple of those. The first we got from Mary Jo Wyatrick, I think is the proper pronunciation. She's an attorney, by the way, and I think her work is with Native American child welfare, if I remember correctly. And I would just note that the 100th year anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act is on June 2nd. And I think that's a wonderful moment to celebrate what we've done to make a more inclusive elections administration for Native voters, but also to look in the mirror and see if there are things that we can do better. I know we prioritize it in Colorado, and I encourage all states to think about, hey, how can we reach out to this particular group of people? But Mary Jo brings up, how can the various funding that we've talked about be used to help extend and improve mail ballot or absentee ballot elections? Ben, why don't I throw that to you and see if there's any special programs you know about that have been funded through the EAC HAVA funds?
Thanks, Judd. Again, one of the great things to me about the HAVA security grants is really that flexibility. And so while our grants team can help with the specifics, as Judd knows, at the end of the day, the baseline guiding principle is it a program that's designed to improve federal elections? And so, again, I think this is an area that we've seen a number of states move to more mail, certainly in the aftermath of the pandemic or during the pandemic, we saw more people move there in that direction. And I think for people looking to implement new programs and or improve the security or transparency of those programs, I think this is an area that funding could be utilized.
Yeah, in particular, something like improving your cure process. So you've got people, whenever you do a vote by mail process, you're probably going to have people who sort of fail somewhere along the line, and that ballot can't be counted. States should try to implement cure processes where you can cure that bad signature, you can add a signature where one isn't, you can add a date where one isn't, those kinds of things that can make a ballot that otherwise can't be counted into one that can be counted. So Sam, let me throw you a question. I'll start with more of a comment, and that is, and I'm sure everybody on this screen and everybody listening will get tired of the fact that I always bring this up, but I'll take this opportunity to note that the federal government is the only government that doesn't fund elections on a routine basis. And I think personally that we should think about our ballots in terms of real estate, right? There's real estate on the ballot that the federal government doesn't pay for. And it just so happens to be the best real estate on the ballot. It's like the primo real estate on the ballot. And it seems to me to make sense that could be the basis for a future funding model where we really do purchase that length of space, kind of like the space in a newspaper column. How much is various government contributing to the ballot and thus paying for that space. Sam, what do you think? Is that a good way to think about this question?
Yep, I think that's a great way to think about this question, sort of stapled to an idea that the sort of there's real estate in all of the infrastructure that you all are putting together that like also needs to be purchased. So Minnesota, for example, just to take that sort of last question, Minnesota just passed a new policy last year that allowed for a permanent absentee list. That's great. That requires probably mailing more ballots to voters. The state stepped up with a new $1.25 million fund for counties and cities in Minnesota to implement that. The state probably needs to provide a little bit more funding in addition to the federal government, Judd, in order to sort of make that policy implementation go great. And I think like what you are sort of bringing up is a really important dynamic around funding, which is that there are officials, city and county officials across the country, Democrats, Republicans, who are being asked by the federal government to do something without paying for that thing that they're being asked to do. And that is, I think, exactly as you said, the most important dynamic we have to remember here. This isn't a partisan issue. This isn't about policy. This isn't about like changing the ways we're running elections. This is about literally just, as you said, buying that real estate on the ballot, the federal government and state governments that are asking counties and cities across the country to run their elections, paying for those elections in these urban, rural, red, blue, east, west sort of jurisdictions across the country.
Yeah, and the way that I always think about it, at least this is the way it works in Colorado, and I'm pretty sure that it works this way across most states, and that is that the local community, so in our case, the counties, they ask the school board and the special districts, hey, you've got 3 issues on the ballot, you've got 4 candidates on the ballot, that's going to take this amount of space, we're going to need to print this and do that. This is how much that costs. Then they do the same thing for their county commissioners. They do the same thing for the RTD or whatever the other associated jurisdictions are. And the one entity there that doesn't contribute is the feds. Not to call out my friends Cait and Ben on the call, but you of course don't have a role in making those decisions just yet. Maybe in the future you will. All right, so let me shift to Cait. So if you were to, let's say I were to pose this question to you, Cait. So let's say I want to know, I'm a local election official. What are the 2 or 3 biggest items, best items, biggest bang for my buck that I could go to my CISA official, maybe go to my elections coordinator for the region and say, I want to do these things that will help to improve the security and administration of my elections. What's my short list there?
As expected, coming from you, that is probably the most important question you could have asked, and an incredibly thoughtful one. So thank you, Dr. Choate. It's a great point, right? So what is going to give you the biggest return on investment versus a long laundry list of things I could read off to you? If you had to do 2 things, what would they be? So the first I will say is ask us to run a tabletop exercise for you. And I say that because you get so many different things in one event, and it takes some of the logistical lift off of you. So in these tabletop exercises, we can work with your team to craft scenarios that explore physical and cyber risks in a way that have you and your teams rehearse how you're going to respond. And at the same time, we highly encourage local law enforcement and other partners that you have to be part of those training exercises too. Because the reality is, as you all know, when things go wrong, it's not just going to be you there, right? It's going to be your emergency responders. And so it's a trite but true phrase. You don't want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of an emergency. How do you build those relationships in advance? And that's where I do think that tabletop exercises is like the best single point of engagement and exposure, because it's learning on the spot together, it's rehearsing incident response plans, and it's building those partnerships with those key stakeholders like law enforcement, fire departments, National Guard, your state office, all in one. So highly, highly encourage you all to encourage your state to take us up on it. If your associations want to do one, we run tabletop exercises for associations too. We were just out in Colorado in January for the Colorado Association. Like, please take us up on this stuff, because I think that that truly is the best way to help us help you cover down on the most areas. So Judd, I'll even just say that if you do nothing else, please encourage your state association or your state, or honestly, if just a group of you got together, reach out to your local CISA rep and say, I want a TTX before November. And then have us help come out and put one together. The second thing I'd say is, depending on if you're more concerned about cyber or physical, have one of our field staff come out to your office and do an assessment. Because we'll talk through things, we'll help war game with you and troubleshoot for what those low to no cost solutions could be between now and November, while we keep our eye on the goalpost for future infrastructure improvements. So.
Love it. That's fantastic. I'll just throw out another one that pops into my head. Join the ISAC. If you are not a member of the EI ISAC, please join. It's really easy. All you got to do, go to Google, put in elections ISAC, and it'll take you straight to the join page. You'll get a bunch of great information about election security, cybersecurity related things, and it'll get you involved in this larger community of election security administration. So that would be a great tip as well.
If I could use that opening, because I feel like this could be my third without getting really a third, absolutely join the EI ISAC. So I dropped in the chat the link to our Protect 2024 page. You'll see we actually thought about the same exact question, where we were like, if we asked election officials to do nothing else between now and the end of October, what would those be? So we call it the first things first. Joining the EI ISAC is one of those 6 things that we encourage election officials to do. If you join the EI ISAC, so CISA funds a large percentage of the EI ISAC through a cooperative agreement. One of the things that we also fund, beyond just being a member of the EI ISAC and getting that threat intel sharing, you can also sign up for free cybersecurity services that we are paying for through the EI ISAC that you can leverage. So when we talked about before, things like endpoint detection and response software, CISA is funding free licenses for EI ISAC members to use at the state and local level. They're specific to those supporting election infrastructure, or what we call target-rich, cyber resource challenged types of election offices, right? But really, this is one of those things where it's free as long as you're a member. And again, you're getting top level commercial solutions to help you defend these things.
Yeah, fantastic. If you're just Googling, Google elections ISAC, and that's a great way to sign up. And as Cait alludes to, it opens you up to all these other opportunities that you can learn about and take advantage of. All right. Thank you so much, Cait Conley, Ben Hovland, Sam Oliker-Friedland. Really great information. I appreciate it. And thanks so much for joining us today. They are also very busy, so it's great to have them join us. Okay, I am going to hand it to Lee Chittenden from the CEA program at the University of Minnesota, and she is going to sign us out.
All right, can you see my screen there?
Yeah, sure can.
Great. All right, thanks, Judd, and thank you to our panelists. Great conversations today. I really appreciate you all joining us. Before we go, I just wanted to give you all a little bit more information about our Certificate in Election Administration program. So let's see here, we've got, it's an online program here at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School. We began in 2017. Our mission is to expand the professional expertise in the field of elections and really prepare the next generation and create a pipeline of new election administrators. Our curriculum covers the fundamental building blocks of elections, as well as sort of digging into those broader tensions and issues facing our election systems. Our students come away with sort of critical thinking skills to navigate those challenges and opportunities, as well as knowledge of best practices. Again, the program is fully online, very accessible, designed for working professionals. We offer it at both the undergraduate and graduate level, and you can start the program in the fall, summer, or spring terms. We have an amazing faculty, folks like Judd Choate, Jennifer Morrell, who you've heard about a lot today, Tammy Patrick, and others. Great practitioners, super knowledgeable, and really well versed in the field and great to work with. And they are also very eager to connect with our students and help you connect with others in the field. There are two ways for you to participate in the program. You can apply to the full program through an application. We have our application for fall is open right now. It's due August 15th, and then the semester starts the first week of September. Or you can also try out a course, just low barrier, try it out, see if you like it. And that's taking a course as a non-degree seeking student. And then if you enjoy it, you can sort of apply and then move into the program from there. So it's a nice opportunity for just trying it all out. The application is very simple, very straightforward application form one for undergrad, one for graduate level, a resume, and a pretty straightforward personal statement. So it's pretty basic. We've got our links there to our graduate and undergraduate application. We're also very excited to announce that we do have some CEA specific scholarships that we will be offering for the first time this fall. We have two scholarships. One we're calling the Professional Development Scholarship, which will be focused for current election officials and professionals. And then we have an Emerging Leaders one that will be for folks newer and entering the field. These are partial scholarships, so they'll cover part of the tuition, and they are based on sort of a combination of merit and need. There's an application. It'll be open on our website on June 10th. They are due by August 1st, and you can contact us for some more information about that. So that's pretty exciting. First time we've done that. You also have an opportunity to take a course this summer. We have two great offerings starting on June 3rd, Strategic Management of Election Administration, course really explores of the political and strategic challenges of administering elections. That'll be taught by Catherine Pearson, a professor of political science here at the University of Minnesota. And then we also have Introduction to Election Security, taught by Jennifer Morrell of the elections group. And this examines some of the history of cyber attacks on the US elections and explores some of the threats and strategies to protect against them. So those are both great courses. You can still enroll. They start in about 2 weeks, and you can reach out to us for more information on how to get registered for those. If you have more questions about the program, we would love you to join us at one of our info sessions. We hold these regularly. It's an opportunity for you to meet with our staff, ask questions, get more detailed, specific information for your situation. We have a few coming up, as you can see there. So feel free to join us, and there's a way to register online. And lastly, again, we will be posting this recording along with presentations on our website in about a day or so. And here's our contact information for the program, our webpage, and also our email. Please reach out and get in touch with us. We love to hear from you. And again, thank you all for joining us. It was a great conversation. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.